Melissa adjusted the hem of her crisp white blouse and sighed as she glanced in the mirror. The reflection staring back at her was one of poise and perfection, a well-dressed woman ready to face the world. Yet, inside, she felt the gnawing pangs of dissatisfaction. It wasn't her appearance that bothered her. Melissa knew she was attractive. It was her life, or rather, how others might perceive it. In the cozy but modest apartment she shared with her husband, Tom, Melissa felt a tug of conflict. Tom hummed softly in the kitchen, his work boots still slightly damp from his early morning shift. Melissa knew she should feel proud of him. He was a kind and hard-working man, dedicated to his job as a street cleaner. But pride wasn't what she felt. Shame had quietly settled in its place. Tom appeared in the doorway with a bright smile, holding a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. "Breakfast is ready," he announced, his hazel eyes sparkling with warmth. "You've got a big day, right? The gala planning meeting?" "Yes," Melissa replied curtly, taking the plate without meeting his gaze. She hated how her tone came out, clipped and dismissive. Tom deserved better, but the thought of explaining his profession to her friends weighed heavily on her mind. The planning committee for the gala was comprised of women like Claire and Amanda, polished, well-connected, and married to successful men with careers that turned heads. Melissa's friends often asked about Tom, and each time, she dodged the question or changed the subject. She knew she couldn't do that forever. "I think the city's looking great these days," Tom said, breaking her train of thought. He grabbed his thermos and prepared to head out for his afternoon shift. "I'm proud of the work my team's been doing. You wouldn't believe the mess we cleared near the riverfront yesterday." Melissa forced a smile, pretending to care as she sipped her coffee. "That's nice, Tom." His expression faltered slightly, but he didn't press her. "Well, I'll be back around 6. Good luck with the meeting." As the door closed behind him, Melissa set her mug down and leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. She wanted to shake the unease out of her chest, but it clung to her like a shadow. Why couldn't she feel the same pride that Tom did? Instead, her mind was preoccupied with what Claire or Amanda might say if they found out he spent his days sweeping streets. Later that afternoon, Melissa found herself sitting in a sunlit room at Amanda's sprawling suburban home. The meeting was in full swing, with discussions about caterers, floral arrangements, and entertainment. Melissa chimed in occasionally, her voice blending with the chatter. But when the topic turned to their husbands, her pulse quickened. "My husband's company just closed a major deal," Claire said, her smile radiant. "It's going to be featured in Forbes next month." "Wow, that's incredible," Amanda replied, her admiration genuine. "And what about Tom, Melissa? What's he been up to?" Melissa froze for a moment, feeling the weight of their expectant gazes. She swallowed hard, plastering on a smile. "Tom's been busy too. He's, managing some new projects for the city's environmental team." It wasn't entirely untrue, she reasoned. Tom did work for the city, and his job technically involved the environment. But the embellishment tasted bitter on her tongue. "That's wonderful," Claire said, nodding approvingly. "It must be fulfilling to know he's making a difference." Melissa nodded along, forcing herself to relax. The lie had worked, for now. That evening, as she waited for Tom to come home, Melissa replayed the conversation in her mind. The knot of guilt tightened in her chest, but she pushed it aside. This wasn't about lying, she told herself. It was about protecting Tom, and herself, from judgment. When Tom walked through the door, his face smudged with dirt and his hands calloused from the day's work, Melissa kissed his cheek and asked about his day. He beamed, launching into a story about a stray dog he and his coworkers had rescued during their shift. Melissa listened half-heartedly, her mind elsewhere. Tomorrow, she'd see Claire and Amanda again, and the charade would continue. But for now, she let Tom's voice fill the room, his optimism a stark contrast to the unease she couldn't shake. Melissa stepped out of the shower, her fingers lingering on the gold necklace Tom had given her last Christmas. It was simple yet elegant, just like him. She caught herself smiling at the thought of how he'd saved for months to buy it, but her expression quickly faded. Tonight wasn't about sentimental moments. Tonight was about maintaining appearances. The gala at the Sherwood estate was one of the most anticipated events of the year among Melissa's circle. A fundraiser for local charities, it drew everyone who mattered, local politicians, business executives, and, of course, Melissa's friends, Claire and Amanda. For weeks, Melissa had debated whether to attend alone, but Claire had insisted on meeting Tom. "He's been such a mystery," Claire had said with a laugh. "Bring him along so we can finally put a face to the name." Tom, unaware of her inner turmoil, had been thrilled at the idea of joining her. Melissa had hesitated, but in the end, she relented. She convinced herself it was a chance to show her friends that her life was as picture-perfect as theirs, if only for one night. "Do I look all right?" Tom asked as he stepped out of the bedroom, adjusting the collar of his shirt. He'd borrowed a blazer from his brother, and though it was slightly tight in the shoulders, he looked presentable. Handsome, even. Melissa turned to face him, her gaze softening for a moment. "You look fine," she said, smoothing the lapel of his jacket. "Just remember, if anyone asks, you manage environmental projects for the city. Don't go into too much detail." Tom's brow furrowed. "Manage projects?" "Melissa, I'm a street cleaner. I'm not ashamed of it." "I know you're not," Melissa said quickly, her tone defensive. "But these people, they can be judgmental. It's just easier this way." Tom's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't argue. Instead, he grabbed the car keys and held the door open for her. "Let's get this over with." The Sherwood estate was breathtaking. Lights twinkled from every corner of the grand ballroom, and the soft hum of classical music filled the air. Servers in crisp uniforms moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, and laughter echoed off the high ceilings. Melissa and Tom stepped inside, and immediately, Claire spotted them. "Melissa," she called, waving her over. "And this must be Tom." Claire was radiant in a deep red gown, her smile warm as she extended a perfectly manicured hand toward Tom. He shook it firmly, his nerves hidden behind a polite smile. "Tom works for the city," Melissa began, cutting in before Tom could speak. "He manages environmental projects. It's such important work." Claire nodded approvingly. "That's wonderful. We need more people dedicated to keeping our city sustainable." Tom shifted uncomfortably beside Melissa, but he smiled and nodded along, choosing to stay silent. The lie hovered between them like an invisible wall. As the evening wore on, Melissa navigated the room with practiced ease, introducing Tom to her friends and deflecting any probing questions about his work. Tom, for his part, played along, though Melissa could sense his unease. She ignored it, focusing instead on the glow of approval she received from Claire and Amanda. At one point, Amanda leaned in conspiratorially and said, "You're lucky, Melissa. A husband who's involved in meaningful work and supports you so completely, it's rare these days." Melissa forced a smile, nodding in agreement, but guilt quilled tightly in her stomach. Tom had always supported her, but could she say the same for him? The evening took a turn when one of Claire's friends, a man named Richard, joined their group. Richard was an urban planner, and as soon as he learned of Tom's supposed role, he launched into a detailed discussion about zoning regulations and green initiatives. Tom listened patiently, but Melissa could see the tension in his jaw. When Richard paused to ask for Tom's opinion on a specific project, the room seemed to hold its breath. "Well," Tom began slowly, "I think Tom works more on the operations side of things," Melissa interjected quickly, her voice overly bright. "He's not involved in the technical details." Richard raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Tom glanced at Melissa, his expression unreadable, and took a sip of his champagne. The ride home was silent. Melissa stared out the window, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Tom, usually so talkative, was equally quiet. When they arrived at their apartment, Tom finally broke the silence. "Melissa, why do you feel the need to hide what I do?" His voice wasn't angry, but the hurt in it was unmistakable. Melissa turned to face him, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. It's not about you, Tom. It's about them. They wouldn't understand. Tom shook his head. Maybe they wouldn't. But I thought you did. He stepped out of the car and walked toward the building, leaving Melissa sitting alone in the dark. For the first time, she realized that her attempts to protect Tom from judgment might have hurt him more than anything anyone else could say. The morning after the gala dawned gray and heavy, the kind of day that hinted at an impending storm. Melissa stood by the window, staring at the overcast sky as the sound of Tom's movements echoed from the kitchen. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind like a broken record, each detail sharpening her guilt. She wanted to say something to Tom, to bridge the growing distance between them, but the words felt tangled in her throat. "Coffee?" Tom asked, interrupting her thoughts. Melissa turned to see him holding out a steaming mug. She nodded, offering a faint smile. "Thanks." He joined her by the window, his gaze focused on the street below. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't tense, but it wasn't comfortable either. It was simply there, stretching between them like the space in their bed had the night before. "They're saying the storm could be a bad one," Tom said, breaking the quiet. "I might be called in early." Melissa nodded again, sipping her coffee. She wanted to ask him if he was still upset, but instead, she said, "Be careful." Tom glanced at her, his expression softening. "Always." By midday, the rain had started, a steady, relentless downpour that blurred the city skyline. Tom had left hours ago, his gear packed and his boots laced tight. Melissa tried to distract herself with household tasks, but her thoughts kept drifting back to him. She hated the idea of him out there, soaked to the bone and navigating dangerous conditions. Yet, she also felt the sting of her own pride, a stubborn resistance to admit she was wrong. As the storm intensified, news reports flooded the airwaves. Streets were submerged, power lines were down, and emergency crews were stretched thin. Melissa's phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Hope you're staying dry. This storm is insane." Melissa stared at the message, her mind wandering to the gala. Claire's voice, so full of admiration for Tom's fabricated role, echoed in her ears. Melissa had wanted so badly to fit in, to feel respected among her peers, but at what cost? Tom's words from the night before rang in her mind. "I thought you understood." She set the phone down and turned on the news. Footage of flooded streets and stranded cars filled the screen, followed by a live report from the riverfront. The area had been one of Tom's usual routes, and Melissa's stomach tightened as the reporter described the scene. "City workers are out in full force," the anchor said. "Their efforts have been crucial in preventing further damage." The camera panned to a group of workers clearing debris from a storm drain. Melissa leaned forward, her breath catching as she recognized Tom in his reflective vest, his face streaked with rain and mud. He was directing others, his voice calm and commanding even in the chaos. Her chest swelled with an emotion she couldn't quite name, pride, fear, regret. All at once, she saw him not as the man she felt she had to defend or hide, but as someone strong, capable, and deeply admirable. That evening, the storm reached its peak. Melissa's heart raced every time the wind howled or lightning illuminated the darkened apartment. She kept the news on, hoping for updates, but the coverage had shifted to other areas of the city. When the knock finally came at the door, she nearly ran to answer it. Tom stood there, drenched and exhausted, but safe. His boots were caked with mud, and his jacket was torn at the sleeve, but his eyes were steady. "You're soaked," Melissa said, ushering him inside. She grabbed a towel and handed it to him, her hands trembling slightly. "Thanks," he muttered, drying his hair. "It was rough out there, but we managed." Melissa hesitated, then said softly, "I saw you on the news." Tom glanced at her, surprised. "You did?" She nodded, her throat tightening. "You were amazing. The way you led everyone, how calm you were." I was proud of you, Tom." His expression softened, but he didn't respond right away. Instead, he hung his jacket by the door and sat on the couch, running a hand through his damp hair. Melissa joined him, the silence between them now heavy with unspoken emotions. "I've never been ashamed of what I do," Tom said finally, his voice steady but tired. "It's honest work. It helps people. I just wish you could see that." Melissa's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "I do see it, Tom. I think I've been so caught up in what other people think that I forgot what really matters. You matter." Tom studied her for a moment, then reached for her hand. "It's not about what they think, Melissa. It's about us. About being honest with each other." She nodded, gripping his hand tightly. "I want to do better. I mean that." For the first time in days, Tom smiled, a small, weary smile, but genuine. And for the first time, Melissa felt the weight of her insecurities start to lift. The storm had passed, leaving the city battered but alive with a sense of relief. The morning sunlight streamed through the apartment windows, highlighting the lingering puddles and debris scattered on the streets below. Melissa stood by the counter, nursing her coffee, while Tom sat across from her, finishing his breakfast. He looked exhausted, his movements slower than usual, his eyes shadowed, but there was a calm in his demeanor that Melissa hadn't noticed before. It was as though the chaos of the past 24 hours had settled something inside him. "You should rest today," Melissa said, her voice soft. "You've done enough." Tom shook his head, offering a faint smile. "The city doesn't stop just because the storm does. There's still cleanup to do." Melissa wanted to protest, to tell him he didn't have to push himself so hard, but she stopped. She realized that this work, no matter how grueling or thankless, was part of who he was. And for the first time, she felt a flicker of understanding, not pity, not guilt, but respect. By midday, Melissa's phone buzzed with notifications. A local news outlet had posted a feature about the city workers who had risked their lives during the storm, and Tom's name was mentioned prominently. The article described his leadership in clearing storm drains, rescuing stranded residents, and coordinating efforts with emergency responders. Melissa's heart swelled as she read the piece, her fingers tracing the words on the screen. She could practically see him in the descriptions, the calm, steady figure who had become a lifeline for so many during the chaos. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Claire. "Just saw the article about Tom. Wow, Melissa. You must be so proud." Melissa stared at the message, her emotions swirling. A part of her felt vindicated, finally, others were seeing the man she'd been too afraid to fully embrace. But another part of her felt ashamed. It shouldn't have taken a news article for her to feel this pride. Tom had been this man all along. That afternoon, as Tom returned home for a short break, Melissa met him at the door. "You're famous," she said, holding up her phone with a smile. Tom chuckled, his face flushing slightly. "I wouldn't say that. Everyone else would." Melissa stepped closer, her voice softening. "I read the article, Tom. I saw everything you did. You were incredible." He looked at her, searching her face for sincerity. When he found it, his shoulders relaxed. "I was just doing my job." "No," Melissa said firmly. "You were being a hero." Tom laughed lightly, shaking his head. "Heroes wear capes, not reflective vests." Melissa touched his arm, her eyes glistening. "Heroes make a difference, Tom. And you did." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Then, Tom reached for her hand. "Thanks, Mel. That means a lot." The buzz around Tom's actions continued to grow over the next few days. A local council member called to thank him personally, and his team was invited to a special event at City Hall to recognize their efforts. Melissa felt a mix of pride and nervousness as she watched Tom navigate the newfound attention with humility. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Tom turned to her. "There's a ceremony at City Hall tomorrow," he said. "They're giving out awards to everyone who helped during the storm. I want you to come with me." Melissa hesitated, her mind racing. The thought of standing beside Tom, fully acknowledging his role as a street cleaner, filled her with both fear and determination. She knew this was a chance to make things right, to stand by him, not just as his wife, but as someone who truly supported him. "I'll be there," she said finally, her voice steady. "I wouldn't miss it." Tom smiled, his eyes warm with gratitude. "It means a lot to me, Melissa." And as she looked at him, she realized it meant a lot to her too. The next morning, Melissa carefully chose her outfit, a simple yet elegant dress that felt true to herself. She wanted to walk into City Hall with confidence, to face whatever questions or comments came her way. This wasn't about appearances anymore. It was about Tom. When they arrived, the hall was buzzing with activity. City officials, reporters, and workers milled about, exchanging stories and congratulations. Melissa stayed close to Tom, her nerves tingling as they moved through the crowd. "Tom," a voice called out, and they turned to see Claire approaching. She wore an impressed smile, her gaze flicking between Tom and Melissa. "You're quite the local celebrity. I read all about what you did during the storm. Amazing work." Tom chuckled, shaking her hand. "Just doing my part." Claire turned to Melissa, her expression genuine. "You must be so proud." Melissa smiled, her heart swelling. "I am. More than I can say." As Claire walked away, Melissa turned to Tom. "I've spent so much time worrying about what people think," she admitted quietly. "But today, I don't care about any of that. I just want to be here for you." Tom squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with appreciation. "That's all I've ever wanted, Mel." As the ceremony began, Melissa watched with a mixture of awe and pride as Tom and his team were called to the stage. When Tom accepted his award, he spoke briefly, his words humble and heartfelt. "This job isn't glamorous," he said, his voice steady. "But it matters. Every one of us out there, rain or shine, is doing what we can to make our city a better place. I'm grateful to be part of it." The crowd erupted into applause, and Melissa felt a tear slide down her cheek. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the weight of insecurity or doubt. She felt free. The applause from the City Hall ceremony still echoed in Melissa's mind as she sat in the quiet of their apartment later that evening. Tom had fallen asleep on the couch, the award resting on the coffee table like a silent reminder of everything she'd failed to see before. She glanced at him, his features relaxed in the glow of the television, and felt an ache in her chest that refused to go away. Melissa picked up her phone and scrolled through the flood of messages and posts about the ceremony. Friends, acquaintances, and even distant relatives had commented on how inspiring Tom's story was. Claire had texted again. "Tom is such a natural leader. You're so lucky, Melissa." Lucky. The word lingered in her mind, filling her with a mix of gratitude and shame. Claire's words were meant as a compliment, but they felt like a mirror reflecting Melissa's deepest flaws. She had spent so much time trying to reshape Tom into someone who fit a version of success that didn't even matter. She set the phone down and turned her attention back to Tom. His hand was draped over the armrest, his fingers curled slightly, and she noticed the roughness of his skin. Those hands had cleared debris, directed his team, and saved lives during the storm, yet she had been embarrassed by them. The thought stung, and tears welled in her eyes. The next morning, Tom stirred awake to find Melissa already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook in front of her. He rubbed his eyes and sat up, his voice groggy. "Morning. What's all this?" Melissa looked up, startled, and quickly closed the notebook. "Just thinking," she said, her tone uncertain. Tom frowned but let it go. "You don't usually write things down." "I don't usually have this much to think about," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom joined her at the table, his brow furrowed. "What's on your mind?" Melissa hesitated, staring down at the notebook as if the words she needed were written there. But they weren't. They were tangled inside her, a knot of regret and realization that she didn't know how to untangle. "I've been so unfair to you, Tom," she began, her voice trembling. "All this time, I've cared so much about what other people think. I let it blind me to what really matters." Tom's expression softened, but he said nothing, letting her continue. "You've always been proud of your work," Melissa said, her eyes filling with tears. "And I've been too caught up in my insecurities to be proud of you too. Seeing you on that stage yesterday, hearing you speak, it made me realize how wrong I've been." Tom reached across the table and took her hand, his grip firm and steady. "Melissa, I've never needed you to defend me. I've just wanted you to stand by me." "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "And I want to do that now. I want to make things right." The rest of the day passed in quiet reflection. Melissa found herself thinking about the countless times she had downplayed Tom's work or avoided talking about it altogether. Each memory felt like a small betrayal, but she was determined to change. That evening, she decided to take a step forward. As Tom relaxed in the living room, Melissa grabbed her phone and drafted a post for social media. It was a simple message, but it came from her heart. "Yesterday, I watched my husband, Tom, receive an award for his incredible work during the storm. I've always admired his dedication, but I haven't always shown it. Tom, I'm so proud of you, not just for what you did during the storm, but for everything you do every day to make our city a better place. I'm lucky to be your wife." She hesitated for a moment before hitting post, her heart pounding as the words went live. Almost immediately, the notifications started pouring in, likes, comments, and messages of support. But Melissa didn't care about the numbers. What mattered was that she had finally spoken her truth. When Tom saw the post later that night, he looked up at Melissa with an expression she couldn't quite place. "You didn't have to do this," he said softly. "I wanted to," she replied. "For you. For us." Tom nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Thank you." As they sat together on the couch, Melissa felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. For the first time, she wasn't worried about appearances or judgment. She was focused on what truly mattered, the man beside her and the life they were building together. The air at City Hall buzzed with anticipation. Melissa stood beside Tom as a small crowd gathered for the recognition ceremony. Workers in reflective vests mingled with city officials and reporters, creating an atmosphere of celebration and gratitude. The hall was adorned with banners thanking the city's emergency responders, and a large podium stood at the center of the stage. Tom adjusted his tie, a rare accessory for him, and glanced at Melissa. "You okay?" he asked, his voice calm but concerned. Melissa smiled, squeezing his arm. "I'm fine. Nervous, but fine." It wasn't entirely untrue. She was nervous, not because of the crowd, but because this moment felt monumental. Standing here, next to Tom, she wasn't hiding or pretending. For the first time, she was fully present, ready to embrace who he was and what he represented. As the ceremony began, a council member took the stage to deliver an opening speech. She spoke eloquently about the storm's devastation and the heroic efforts of those who had worked tirelessly to keep the city safe. Melissa listened intently, her heart swelling with pride as the council member highlighted the essential contributions of the sanitation workers. "These individuals often go unnoticed," the council member said, her voice strong. "But their work is the foundation of our city's resilience. Today, we honor their dedication, courage, and selflessness." The audience erupted in applause, and Melissa joined in, her hands clapping harder than anyone's. She glanced at Tom, who looked humbled but composed. He wasn't one for the spotlight, but Melissa could see how much the recognition meant to him. One by one, the workers were called to the stage to receive certificates of appreciation. When Tom's name was announced, Melissa felt her chest tighten with emotion. She watched as he walked to the podium, his posture steady and confident. The applause grew louder, and Melissa could hear Claire and Amanda cheering from somewhere in the crowd. Tom accepted his certificate with a gracious nod, then stepped up to the microphone. The room fell silent as he began to speak. "I'm not used to being up here," he said with a small laugh. "Most of the time, my work keeps me behind the scenes, or, more accurately, on the streets. The audience chuckled, and Tom's smile widened. But I'm grateful for this moment to share something that's important to me. My team and I don't do this work for recognition. We do it because it needs to be done. We do it because every clean street, every clear drain, and every safe path is a small step toward making this city better for everyone. Melissa's eyes welled with tears as Tom continued. His words were simple but powerful, resonating deeply with the crowd. He spoke about the challenges of his job, the pride he felt in his team, and the importance of valuing all forms of work, no matter how unglamorous they might seem. This award isn't just for me, Tom concluded. It's for every person who shows up every day, rain or shine, to do their part. I'm proud to stand with them, and I'm proud to serve the city. The room erupted into a standing ovation. Melissa rose to her feet, clapping until her hands ached. She wasn't just proud of Tom, she was proud to be his wife, to stand beside him as he received the recognition he so richly deserved. After the ceremony, the room was abuzz with conversations and congratulations. Claire and Amanda found Melissa and Tom near the refreshments table, their faces glowing with admiration. "Tom, that was incredible," Claire said, shaking his hand. "I don't think I've ever heard such a heartfelt speech." "Agreed," Amanda added. "You have a way of making people see things differently. It's inspiring." Tom thanked them graciously, his humility shining through even as he accepted their praise. Melissa stayed quiet, letting him take the spotlight, but the warmth in her chest grew with every kind word directed his way. As the group dispersed, Melissa turned to Tom. "I think they finally get it," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Tom smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "I'm just glad you do." On the ride home, Melissa couldn't stop smiling. The weight she had carried for so long, the fear of judgment, the shame she hadn't even realized she felt, was gone. In its place was a newfound sense of clarity and purpose. "I was thinking," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Maybe we could do something to celebrate your team. A dinner, or a small party. Something to show them how much they're appreciated." Tom glanced at her, his expression softening. "That's a great idea, Mel. I think they'd like that." Melissa nodded, her mind already racing with ideas. For once, she wasn't thinking about appearances or status. She was thinking about connection, gratitude, and the kind of pride that couldn't be measured in titles or accolades. That night, as they sat together on the couch, Melissa reached for Tom's hand. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think success was about what other people saw in you. But now I realize it's about what you see in yourself and in the people you love." Tom looked at her, his eyes filled with a quiet kind of joy. "You've always had that in you, Melissa. You just needed to believe it." And as they sat there, the city quiet and calm around them, Melissa knew he was right. The apartment was quiet as Melissa prepared the dining table for dinner. She had cooked Tom's favorite meal, a rare occurrence, as she usually preferred takeout or quick, effortless meals. Tonight, though, felt different. The air between them was lighter, and for the first time in a long while, Melissa felt a sense of clarity about what she wanted to say. Tom walked in from the bedroom, still dressed in his work clothes, his hair slightly damp from the evening shower. He stopped in his tracks, sniffing the air. "Is that pot roast?" Melissa smiled, lighting a candle at the center of the table. "Figured you deserved it." Tom raised an eyebrow but said nothing, simply sitting down and waiting patiently. Melissa joined him, pouring each of them a glass of iced tea. The flickering candlelight softened the room, creating an intimate atmosphere that felt almost foreign. As they ate, Melissa found herself watching Tom, how he carefully cut his meat, how his fingers still bore traces of his day's labor. She felt her heart tighten, but this time, it wasn't guilt. It was love, unadulterated and pure, washing over her in waves. "I want to say something," Melissa began, setting her fork down. Tom glanced up, his hazel eyes curious but calm. "Okay." Melissa took a deep breath. "I've been wrong, Tom. About a lot of things. About us, about your work, about myself." He tilted his head, silently urging her to continue. All this time, she said, her voice trembling slightly, I've been chasing this idea of what life should look like. I thought success was about appearances, about impressing people like Claire and Amanda. And I thought if I hid the parts of our life that didn't fit that picture, everything would be fine. Tom's brow furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. I was so afraid of what they might think of me, of us, Melissa admitted, tears pooling in her eyes. And in trying to protect myself from their judgment, I hurt you. I made you feel like you weren't enough, and that's the last thing I ever wanted. Tom leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Melissa, he said softly, I never cared what they thought. I only cared what you thought. I know, she whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek. And that's what makes it worse. You've always been so sure of yourself, so steady. And I've been so caught up in my own insecurities that I couldn't see the incredible man right in front of me. Tom reached across the table and took her hand, his grip warm and firm. Mel, I never wanted you to feel ashamed. I just wanted you to see the value in what we have. In who we are. I see it now, Melissa said, her voice breaking. I see you, Tom. And I'm so sorry it took me this long. Tom's lips curved into a small, understanding smile. We all have things to learn, Melissa. What matters is that we grow. In the days that followed, Melissa's resolve to change manifested in tangible ways. She began to ask Tom about his work, not out of politeness, but out of genuine interest. She listened as he recounted the challenges and triumphs of his day, her admiration for him deepening with every story. Melissa also made an effort to reconnect with people in a more authentic way. When she met with Claire and Amanda for coffee, she no longer shied away from talking about Tom's job. Instead, she spoke openly about his role, even sharing the impact he had during the storm. To her surprise, her friends responded with genuine interest and respect. Tom sounds amazing, Amanda said, her eyes wide. I don't know many people who would work that hard and still be so humble. He is, Melissa replied, her heart swelling with pride. I'm lucky to have him. Claire smiled warmly. I think we all need to learn a little humility. It's inspiring, really. One evening, as Melissa and Tom sat on the couch watching TV, she turned to him with a new idea. I was thinking, she began, what if we started something together? A way to give back to the community? Tom raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Like what? Maybe a volunteer program, Melissa said, her voice growing more animated. Something that brings people together to clean up neighborhoods, plant trees, or even help during emergencies. You've always said your work is about more than just cleaning, it's about taking pride in where we live. I think other people need to see that too. Tom's face lit up, his smile widening. That's a great idea, Mel. I think it could make a real difference. Melissa beamed, feeling a surge of excitement. For the first time in a long while, she felt like they were truly a team, working together, building something meaningful. As the weeks went by, Melissa's transformation became evident to everyone around her, but most importantly, to herself. She no longer worried about what others thought. Instead, she focused on what truly mattered, her marriage, her community, and her own sense of self-worth. One evening, as she and Tom stood on their apartment balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Melissa leaned her head against his shoulder. You know, she said softly, I used to think I wanted a perfect life. But now I realize, this is perfect. You, me, us. Tom wrapped an arm around her, his voice filled with quiet joy. It always was, Mel. You just needed to see it. And as they stood there, the city alive with possibility, Melissa knew she had finally found her place, not in the eyes of others, but in the love and partnership she shared with Tom. The hum of conversation filled the air as Melissa and Tom stood in the community center. The room was alive with energy, volunteers chatting, tables stacked with supplies, and a banner hanging across the wall that read, Building Together, a Cleaner, Stronger Community. Melissa looked around, her heart swelling with pride. The event she and Tom had organized was finally coming to life. What had started as a simple idea, a way to bring people together to care for their city, had blossomed into something much bigger. Volunteers of all ages had shown up, eager to participate in activities ranging from neighborhood cleanups to tree planting. Tom stepped up beside her, a clipboard in hand and a smile on his face. "Looks like a good turnout," he said, his voice warm with satisfaction. "It's amazing," Melissa replied, her gaze sweeping over the room. "I still can't believe we pulled this off." Tom chuckled. "You give yourself too little credit. This was your idea." "It was our idea," she corrected, nudging him playfully. "And we did it together." Tom's eyes softened, and he reached for her hand. "That's what I love about us, Mel. We're stronger together." The event began with a brief speech, and for the first time, Melissa stood beside Tom as they addressed the crowd. She felt a flicker of nerves as the microphone was passed to her, but Tom's reassuring presence steadied her. "Thank you all for being here," Melissa began, her voice clear and confident. "Today is about more than just cleaning streets or planting trees. It's about taking pride in our city and in each other. It's about coming together to make a difference." The crowd applauded, and Melissa passed the microphone to Tom. He spoke with the same quiet strength that had captivated everyone at the City Hall ceremony, emphasizing the importance of collective action and the value of every contribution. As the volunteers dispersed to their tasks, Melissa and Tom joined one of the cleanup crews, working side by side to clear debris from a local park. Melissa's hands grew dirty, her muscles ached, and sweat beaded on her forehead, but she felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. She had spent so much of her life avoiding anything that might tarnish her image, yet here she was, embracing the work that mattered most. By mid-afternoon, the park looked transformed. The paths were clear, the flower beds were tidy, and the volunteers stood back to admire their work. Children played on the swings, their laughter filling the air, and Melissa couldn't help but smile. As the group began to disperse, an older woman approached Melissa. Her hands were worn, her face lined with years of wisdom, but her eyes sparkled with warmth. "You've got a good man there," the woman said, nodding toward Tom, who was helping a group of volunteers load tools into a truck. Melissa felt her chest tighten with emotion. "I do," she said, her voice soft. "I'm lucky." The woman smiled knowingly. "You two remind me of my husband and me. It's not about what you have or what people think. It's about how you build each other up." Melissa nodded, her heart full. "Thank you. That means a lot." Later that evening, Melissa and Tom returned home, exhausted but elated. They sank onto the couch, their clothes still dusty from the day's work, and Melissa rested her head on Tom's shoulder. "Today was incredible," she said, her voice filled with quiet awe. "Seeing everyone come together like that, it felt right." "It was," Tom agreed. "And it's just the beginning. I think we've started something really special." Melissa lifted her head to look at him. "We have. And I couldn't have done it without you." Tom smiled, his hazel eyes shining. "It's funny. All this time, I thought I was just doing my job, trying to make the city a little better. But you've shown me that it's more than that. It's about connection. About community." Melissa felt a tear slide down her cheek, but this time, it wasn't from guilt or regret. It was from a deep sense of gratitude, for Tom, for their journey, and for the future they were building together. As the weeks turned into months, the initiative grew. More people joined their efforts, inspired by Tom's humility and Melissa's newfound passion for service. The couple's bond deepened with each passing day, their partnership rooted in love, respect, and a shared purpose. One crisp autumn morning, as they walked hand in hand through the park they had helped restore, Melissa glanced at Tom and smiled. "You know," she said, her voice light, "I used to think success was about how people saw me. But now I realize it's about how I see myself, and the people I care about." Tom stopped and turned to her, his gaze tender. "And how do you see yourself now?" Melissa thought for a moment, then said with a smile, as someone who's finally figured out what matters. Tom leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I always knew you would. And as they continued their walk, the city around them alive with hope and possibility, Melissa felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace.